I think I'm an imposter in multiple areas and multiple intersecting planes of my life. The term imposter phenomena was first identified in high-performing women, right? And I'm sitting here as a woman, as a person of color, and realizing that, as the data, we realize that all populations experience imposter syndrome, but there's an increased vulnerability, increased rate among folks that may feel marginalized or underrepresented, so people of color, women in certain fields, immigration status. When you are younger, you feel more vulnerable compared to the majority of the population who have actually reached maturity, right? Children are still the minority of any population, right? And they are physically, of course, smaller, and so feel less than. So there are some things that I think are right to be developmentally expected for children, but then as a society, how do we think about the multiple ways that imposter syndrome can intersect, right? And what do we do to combat that, right? To recognize it. And one thing that came up in both of your talks was the key role of not isolating, right? Not decreasing your sample and kind of digging into that data, but expanding, right? Getting into community, speaking openly and truthfully, confessing. Start sampling 6 more people, right? To increase your N from 1 to 7, right? If you're going to compare, right, to start to listen to diverse voices. And so maybe what do you think in terms of what are other ways that we, maybe as a community, right, whether here at our various institutions in New York or maybe within our departments, can counteract the tendency to isolate? So I, as a Asian woman, right, might limit myself and say, I can only be understood by other Asian women, right, in my field, in my subsection of psychiatry at my institution, and then really delude myself, right, into feeling I am all alone and I am the lone imposter in this room, when in reality, recognizing that the struggle is much more universal and actually probably an indicator, right, of my emotional and social ability to pick up, to read a room, to notice my status in society. It actually may be a plus that is turned into a negative, right, that is working against me now and cutting me off from the very resource that would help orient me. So any thoughts on the multiple imposter profiles that we carry within ourselves?
Yeah. So here's something that helps me a little bit on a good day. I wrote a quote down. I wonder if anyone, maybe historians here, anyone recognizes this quote. I am very poorly today and very stupid. That's very esoteric. Does anyone have any guess who said that? It's a quote from Charles Darwin in 1861, writing to his friend. And the idea that Charles Darwin can confess to a friend that he feels stupid, where, no offense to anyone here, but he's Charles Darwin and we're not, is, to me, it's just mind-blowing, right? So on the one hand, you could take it as like in a pessimistic way, which sometimes I do, is like, oh, everybody feels this way, there's no hope for me. But then, wait for it. But then you can take it in the optimistic way, which is, everybody feels this way. So there's hope for me, right? And, I'm a real true believer in the truth shall set you free, in the sense that just knowing that these things are common. And for me, that means doing research in psychology and understanding, the prevalence of these kind of beliefs. But it could also be just reading about other people's experiences, asking people about their experiences. Just knowing that it's out there makes me feel less alone in the struggle. Am I less isolated? Well, I spent 12 hours today in my office by myself before coming here, so probably not. I mean, I did talk with the cafeteria person when I bought food for lunch, but that's it. But mentally, knowing that this is not something you're going through by yourself has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I will emphasize is also So one of the modes of psychotherapy is cognitive behavioral therapy, and there you're looking, at least in part, at the truth or falsehood of certain cognitions or beliefs that people have, particularly about themselves. And there's all sorts of really interesting research on of how similar stimuli or identical stimuli can have different neural responses based on what you do with it. So we were talking about this before the coming up here. One of my favorite studies is titled "Putting Feelings into Words," and so if you show people an emotional face, their amygdala is going to light up. But if you have them say, "Don't just respond to it, just think of the word that matches to that face, or match the word and the face," there's a different brain response. The stimulus is identical, the same same photons hitting the same retina, going to the same visual cortex, but it routes differently in the brain based on what you're doing. And so when you're in a social setting, and for example, writing a letter to your friend about how stupid you are as Charles Darwin, and you're the friend responding in the letter, you're not responding with your own amygdala. You're thinking rationally. You're Charles Darwin, and maybe you'll do something good someday, and you'll respond with, I imagine, something like that. And so it's and that's partly what community can do on the lay side. And of course, if things get more serious, formal psychotherapy can be very helpful at helping unravel some of these distorted brain messages or false thoughts or cognitive distortions. But I do agree. And he said he wasn't no spiritual bone in his body, but he just quotes Jesus up here before I do. I also agree that the truth shall make you free. But
Misquote. And I think I would add something else. And just by a show of hands, is anyone here, an occasional runner, cyclist? Okay, so we have a few that are, okay. So, you know that feeling when you go out for a run or a cycle and you're just facing a headwind and that run is just, it's excruciating pain. Like you're like, oh, why did I do this? I should have stayed home. And like every step is difficult. And then you turn around and, and on your way back home, now naturally the wind is now at your back. So you're enjoying the tailwind for a few seconds. And then what happens? You kind of forget about it and your mind goes to like other stuff. And to me, that's fascinating. And in fact, my grad school advisor and I, we conducted a series of studies about exactly this phenomenon, what we call the headwind-tailwind asymmetry, which is hard things in our lives are in our face. By definition, we have to deal with them in order to get them out of our face. We can't not pay attention to them. The good things, the easy things, the wind at our back, we don't need to attend to it. We can just enjoy it and move on, which is very adaptive. But the problem is that we spend more time focusing on the difficulties that we face and not enough time on the things that give us, that leg up, that push us forward. With one caveat, and I'm happy to talk about that one caveat later, but what we found that this shows up in all different kinds of situations in life. We talked about siblings rivalry before. We found that we ask people, we surveyed people that have one and only one sibling, and we asked them, who does your parent love more? Now, statistically, we should get half the people saying the other one and half the people saying me. And that's not what we got. We randomly selected Republicans and Democrats and said, who does the Electoral College benefit? Both parties thought it's the other side. We surveyed 1,000 researchers in accounting. Is anyone here in accounting? Okay, so researchers in accounting, there's experimental accounting, and then there's archival accounting. And we ask who has an easier time getting into journals? It's the other ones. We're the ones that face all the difficulties. And that's a problem because now, of course, it's a problem, but once you realize it, I promise you, next time you're on a run or cycling, and you'll have that hard time, you'll be like, oh, okay, I can't believe I'm running today. And you're like, oh, wait, the same wind is going to help me on my way back, right? And it just knowing about the way our mind works, for me at least, has been really helpful.
And I think it's a great insight, and I think this goes for all of these, particularly sort of cognitive biases. They mostly can be overcome, or that they can often be overcome with directed attention. That if you're for the feelings into words, it's the conscious application of attention. You can direct the brain in various ways with this knowledge, and so but this also gets to habit, and so that there are sort of defaults that might be because we're primates, and that we share with chimpanzees. I don't know if you've done any of this work on chimpanzees, but they also love to compare with each other. You pay a chimpanzee unfairly, and they are not happy. They're very well aware to know that equal work equals equal pay, and they're going to throw your banana back in your face if you pay them not what they are owed. And so you've got these really interesting experiments of like, okay, some of this is just like primate brain, and some of it might be even like deeper or older, however you want to call it. But that we also have this sort of at least bigger, if not overlaid, depending on what level we're comparing to, prefrontal cortex that allows us to override that. And if you repeatedly do that, you can build a habit. You could do that automatically. And this is my own. I'm persuaded by virtue ethics on the philosophy question. The idea that you've achieved virtue when you're not even tempted by the thing that's going wrong. You've done the thing so often and so well, so long, that when the temptation comes, you're not even tempted. One philosopher I like put it, if Blackbeard's a Kantian and he's really trying hard to not steal, and a bank vault spills open, he'll think, I ought not steal what is not mine, and he'll resist the temptation. So he's good on on deontological ethics. Francis of Assisi, same thing. Bank vault opens up. Who would want money? Not even tempted by somebody else's money. You're just going to go about your life and talking to the birds and preaching the good news. But that when you've really achieved virtue, it's not something you're having to apply conscious attention to anymore. And what are the limits of that? Who even knows? But I think that to some of these biases, some of them are baked real deep, and particularly if you've got a mental illness or depression, like it is real deep. But it still means that therapy proves that these things are malleable to some extent, and even biologically.
Yes, I agree. I think we're all recognizing that we're walking around with these cognitive biases, and we're biased about our biases as well. Like there's like multiple layers of self-deception that we can walk around in and still be highly functioning adults. In my work with children and families, I see that we are all asking the question like, what is enough? What is the truth? What is the standard by which I can judge if I'm doing all right or am I a failure? And really, it starts when we're young, right? As children, our caregiver affirmations or criticisms tend to kind of draw the lines, right? This kind of calibrates the way that we think of ourselves and the way that we evaluate others. And sibling rivalry is an example where your calibration can be off, right? And clearly we tend to veer off these things. The original study that described imposter phenomena described that the family dynamics of these high-performing women tended to be of two types, where either one, the woman was the sibling of a superstar, a golden child, and they were considered the inferior sibling, or they were the superstar, right? And in both cases, there was this false attribution, over-attribution of credit to one person and under-attribution to the other person, which carried on for the rest of their life, either trying to prove or disprove the position that they were in. And, Shai, you're saying that if you interviewed siblings, right, the majority will say, I was not the loved one, I was not the beloved one. But what do we do with this in our families, in our departments? And my answer as a clinician has always been to counsel parents to say there is a third option where you don't choose a favorite. You actually celebrate each one of your children for their unique attributes, right? That they are separate individuals. They're not just clones off of yourself or competitors against one another, but what a marvelous, diverse team we have with resilience, different resources brought in by different kids, even within the family as an extended family system. But we are looking to somebody to speak truth like that over us. And some of us do not have that in our departments or in our families of origin even, right? So what are some of the internal resources if you are swimming in a difficult environment where your social group is not one that's going to affirm or celebrate diversity or celebrate your unique gifting or talent or personality traits? What are some internal resources or the intangible resources that we can draw from so that we can correct some of these cognitive biases? How can we test? How do I know that, what are the stars out there that I need to compare myself to? And does it make sense? Should I shoot for the moon, fall among the stars? How do we recalibrate ourselves if our environment that is immediately around us cannot be the trusted community to do so?
So I have thoughts about the internal. I actually think by putting the burden on individuals to deal with their imposter syndrome, we are blinding ourselves to the real reason, right? And the real well, we all are interested in the real ultimate reason. One reason that I believe that it's so prevalent is the external environment. So I'm sorry if I'm doing the obvious kind of like, oh, let me answer a different question. But but I do think it's important to note. We evolved in small groups where we each had our specialty, right? You were the musician, right? You knocked on some rocks together. You were the one knew how to draw on the cave wall. You were the best hunter. You were the best gatherer, right? Everyone had something that they were somewhat unique to the group. And we were also very vigilant about the ones that didn't have anything, right? The free riders, the ones that didn't really contribute anything. But throughout history, we've kind of taken all these different status ladders and we've collapsed them onto one, right? So, let's take the U.S. as an example. It's some sort of socioeconomic ladder, which the best musicians, they are, or not the best, but the most lauded musicians are, rewarded in the same way that the most lauded actors, with the most lauded innovators. And then we basically evaluate everyone based on this one output, which is how much money do you have, or what is your celebrity, how many likes do you have. In academia, we do it based on publications, right? So, of course, when you collapse, when you reduce all value into one metric, you're going to have a lot of people feeling that they're falling through the cracks, that they're falling behind. So to really deal with the issue, we need to rethink the system, right? Like, what are other ways of evaluating each other so we evaluate ourselves differently? Is that helpful for you today when you go home? Probably not. But I think it's a deeper conversation that we need to have. What are other ways that we can value each other so that maybe not everyone, but many of us can feel like they're contributing and feel confident in their contribution?
No, I think that's well put. And I do think that the sort of collapse into this single metric does create a very particular kind of hierarchy where there are a lot more losers than winners. But one solution is to have multiple hierarchies that are that are intertwined. But I think also ultimately trying to have that telos, or the thing that you're going after, be something that's eternal, or that could stand for, that could create unity, even if everybody's going after it. So again, in the let me add again. In the Christian worldview, that single virtue, or that word that encapsulates the one thing that is the good, is love, or agape. Sorry. So agape is this thing that is this word that represents compassionate concern or desire for the good of the other, and that's something that we can compete forever about, and that if we're trying to outdo each other in being truly compassionate, and not just like pushover compassionate, but like really trying to work for the good of other people, it's something that is a hierarchy that points to the ultimate good, which would be God, and that's and that also gets another sort of getting to the comparison thing. I do think that absent that, all you have is comparison with other people. If there is no objective end that is above it all, there is no way to know where you are except relative to other people, and that's always inevitably going to be competitive and potentially in a bad way. But I think that the other thing is that there is another study on comparison, and that I think this is, if I recall, it's been years since I looked at the details of it, but it was looking at self-appraisal versus other appraisal, and what part of the brain is used for that. And there's different parts of the medial prefrontal cortex that are used. And in secular folks, it was two different regions. There's one region of the brain to assess for self, and a different region of the brain to assess for other. But for the Christians in the sample, it was the same region. It was the other region. It was the part of the brain. It was, in essence, they were asking not, am I a compassionate person? Am I a courageous person? It's, does Jesus or does God think that I'm a courageous or adventurous person? Sorry about that. So all that to say, I do think that there's an escape from this sort of all against all kind of universe, but you have to go up.